This is Philip from Beyond the Tabletop, and in this video I'm showing you how to use and install my turret conversion kit. Now the kit, as you can see here in the middle, is compatible with the Games Workshop Leman Russ Turret. The one I'm showing in this video is the standard turret, which is compatible with the battlecannon. There's a different turret which is compatible with the demolisher cannon and a couple of other weapons, but I'll hopefully cover that in a future video. The conversion kit allows you to use your plastic Leman Russ with a myriad of different turret weapons. I sell a bunch on my own website, so I've got a couple here. So I've got the tyrant cannon, and as you can see, I've magnetised them in place, so you can see how I've done it, like so. And then here's the eliminator cannon, which also fits. Now my kit should also make it compatible with the Forgeworld turret weapons, as they're a very similar size. I'll go into a bit more detail about that towards the end of the video and in a few places throughout. So these are all the tools and bits of equipment that you will need for this conversion project. First of all, this is my turret conversion kit. If for some reason you've stumbled across this video without first discovering where this kit is from, it's available from beyondthetabletop.com/shop. Just remove any of the casting gates, clean it up from any mould lines, and also make sure you wash it in warm soapy water just to remove some of the releasing agent. There's a video in the top right hand corner talking about how to do that if you haven't done it before, and there's a couple of other videos in that series if you're new to working with resin. Then you'll need your turret pieces, the top and bottom of the Leman Russ. These are the standard battle cannon ones, not the demolisher turret ones. There will hopefully be another video down the line talking about that, but this kit predominantly isn't compatible with that turret piece. So just make sure you've got the right turret. The current Games Workshop kit sells both of them, so you just need to make sure you're using the right turret. Then of course we've got a hobby knife and a small hobby saw. You can use different sizes depending on what you've got. I've also got a small sanding stick just for cleaning bits up. And then we've got some super glue. I use Gorilla Gel. I really like it because it's like a thick paste. So it's really handy. We'll be using that for gluing the resin together and the resin to the plastic. We've also got some extra thin cement. You can use any kind of plastic glue that you have. That's predominantly for just gluing the two pieces together. We optionally need to fill in some gaps. So I'm using plastic putty from Vallejo. You can use any sorts really, whether that's green stuff, or Tamiya do their own brand of filler as well. So you can use a variety. And again, this is just an optional extra. And then I've got my trusty brass toothpick, which I'll just use for helping me apply some glue and such throughout. So again, that's not necessarily needed, but just handy for some of those small fine detail bits of work. Now, before we start, I just thought I would show you an in-depth look into the actual conversion kit itself. It's made of two parts. We've got a shroud here with some rivet details and some hinges. This fits on top of the second piece, which is the mounting block. And you can see here how the outer hinges meet with the inner hinges to join onto the top. And then on this piece, you can see it's got some extra detail in it. So we've got a periscope and we've got a sight lens and a rangefinder as well. Just some extra detail. And that will eventually sit inside of this turret here, filling out what would normally be a blank void. So it fills in that bit with some nice thematic detail. And if we see back to my original completed one, you can see how that looks all finished. I've not actually glued this in place just yet because it's easier to leave off. So you can see how I've also inserted a very large magnet on the mounting block. You don't need to do one quite so large, but it's how I've done it with my others, so I'm just trying to keep things consistent. And you can see how all that periscope and lens detail now looks inside the block. And then to effectively cover up some of these cut marks, the shroud piece just nicely fits over and adds some extra detail to the turret. So the first thing that we want to do is just remove this top piece here that's just jutting out from the bottom plate. So you just need to take a hobby saw and carefully cut away. Once you've done one side, you just need to do the other. And once you've done that, it's very rough at this stage, so we can just go in and clean it up with a knife or some sanding sticks. So if you're using a very sharp knife, just make sure you cut away from yourself. and here it is cut away. You don't actually need to be neat at this stage because we're going to be removing some of this later on, and none of it will be visible from the outside once the model is complete. But what we do need to do is just make sure that this piece here is relatively flush for when we're mounting on our block, so that none of that is raised up. If it is ever so slightly, which might be just a tiny bit there, what we could do is use the knife or come in with some sanding sticks and just remove that. And here it is cut away. We're then gonna take a look at the top piece. So we just want to flip it upside down, and we want to cut away a few little pieces just here and here on this side, just to enlarge that gap to make the mounting block able to fit in. So what we want to do here is with our knife, in terms of where we're going to cut, on this side you can place your blade flat along this edge here, so we can cut along like so. And I'll just score it slightly so you can see. So you can see how it's going to cut straight down, flush with this piece, this little notch here, and then going down slightly into this piece there. So we're just going to keep cutting all the way down till we hit the bottom. So as you're cutting, you just want to make sure that this is as vertical as possible, really, to keep it nice and neat, but we can tidy it up afterwards. So that's come away. So just repeating the same thing on the other side, having our blade flat up against that notch. So again, you can see how it cuts straight down, going into in line with where that notch is there. And now once you're effectively hitting into this, you know you can stop because you've gone down far enough. So this side it stayed intact, whereas this side drifted over slightly, so it all peeled off. So what we need to do is just cut up and into this piece here. What we effectively want to do is just keep sawing this along until it reaches where this bit is. So we're effectively cutting this piece out here. So we could use the saw, and then once it's reached that point, we could use the saw downwards like this. So that's now come out. Alternatively, we could use our knife to cut along. Be very careful with this method. If your knife is sharp, you can do it a bit incrementally as well. And with that side cut, actually what we want to do is just trim this piece away here, because that needs to go as well. So we can just go in, have our blade lined up flat against this piece here, like that, and then just cut down into it just to take this piece off. Again, using either your saw or your knife for that. So again, this bit's a little bit on the messy side, but we can tidy that up. I actually really want this to come out to line up to here. So I'm just going to keep steadily trimming away. So just repeating the same thing on the other side, having our blade flat up against this piece here. Now you can see these aren't quite even, so we're going to even these up a little bit, but we can also do a test fit to see how this block will fit in. What we want it to be able to do is fit in here, so this bit should go up, and it can't yet because I think I need to trim a bit more of this away. So you can use your knife. In this instance I'm just going to use a sanding stick because it's actually quite good at just trying to even up these pieces just to make sure they're at right angles. And what I'll also do is I'll just slightly straighten this piece up as well so it's nice and flush. So with most of the sanding done, it might be easier just sometimes to come in with a knife just to neaten up a few bits, just to kind of cut in at the angle that you need, just to help square things up, especially in these little corner pieces just here and here that need cleaning up. That might be easier to do than trying to sand it off. We can see it's much more even now, and we can do a test fit. And if we do that test fit, you can see by the way it fits in that actually we still need to take off a bit more on the left. So we can just go in either with a knife or with a sanding stick again, just to try and shave that off until it fits really well. You can see it's almost there. I think what we've got here is, you can see this bit here isn't at a straight angle, so we just need to cut away this little notch just here. So again, carefully do that with your knife. Just be careful it doesn't slip or you cut too far back. That should be a bit better now. Yeah, that fits perfectly now. Now we can just tidy up these areas which I've sanded here. So we can just clean that up just by scraping it with the knife. As long as the knife is nice and sharp, it should give you a nice smooth finish. You can always go in with some different grits of sandpaper if you really want to tidy it up. It won't really be visible because the gun mounting will actually hide the majority of this, but obviously it will be visible once you take the gun out if you've magnetized it, so you might want to tidy that up just for that reason. So you should have a relatively neat cutout of that whole area now, and I'll just show you from a few different angles, which is mostly even on these two sides, and likewise from here. You can see here where this is not as even as it should be. Honestly, this is just because I've had to do it on camera, so it's a bit difficult to see what I'm doing with a camera in the way. Here's one I've done earlier, and you can see where these two plastic blocks on either side are much more flush, and I haven't had to cut away into them just quite as much. So this will give you a nice snug fit, but this one will still work. And we're just going to carry on with this one just to show you how it all works. We can now do a test fit. We can just hold together the top and bottom pieces of the plastic turret. This piece should now be able to slide in pretty straightforward, like so. And you can see there will be some gaps on the left and right, which we can tidy up with that plastic putty or green stuff later on once everything's fully fitted. Now it's at this stage, and this is the important bit, that you want to do a test with your turret weapon of choice. So all of my turret weapons are the same size, so you can just do a simple test fit and you can see if they're going to be a snug fit or not. So this fits in nice and easy. Or likewise we could do the eliminator cannon. So you can see that they fit relatively loose, which is quite good for when it comes painting up. Now you might find that this fit is quite tight. Like I said before, on this slightly neater one, this might have a bit more of a snugger fit. And as you can see, that fits in just like so. Now, if you're wanting to install some of the Forgeworld turrets, it's very important you do a test fit. These are slightly larger to fit, but only by like a millimeter, because if you look here, you can see that the piece actually tapers outwards, so it's thinner at the top and wider at the bottom, whereas all of mine are nice and flush, so it's a lot easier to cut this nice and square to make it fit. However, if you do want to do the Forgeworld ones, do test it out first just to see. Also mine are painted, so they're going to be slightly more snug than if they were unpainted. So you can see that this one does just fit in quite nicely, and you can see how it fits in. Now at the moment it's raised quite high up, and that's because they're also a bit taller, but also you've got this bottom piece in here, so we're going to cut that out just to then allow us to lower the cannon down. But if the fit for the Forgeworld one is too snug, I would suggest just sanding out and tapering outwards towards the bottom, so it's a much nicer fit for your Forgeworld turrets rather than doing a 90-degree angle straight down. So if you just sand outwards towards the bottom, it will help fit those Forgeworld turrets. So after doing that test fit, we're now at a stage where we're able to glue the top piece of the turret to the resin mounting block. So we just want to apply some glue basically along here and just all inside here, because that's where the contact points are going to be for the two pieces. You don't need to go crazy on the glue, and then we can push fit it in. Now it can sort of wobble about a bit, so to make sure it's flush, you just want to hold it in place and add in the bottom piece. So we can just hold it firm and shut, as that's gluing, so we know everything's going to be correctly lined up. Then actually what we want to do is just shove this piece, make sure we push that back so it's lined up as much as possible with the plastic notches. So we're just going to hold it there until it is fully set. Now with that piece glued in, we just need to glue the bottom piece in as well. So we want to apply some super glue here, but actually we want plastic glue all the way along these seam lines. Now if you're doing thick plastic glue, the sort that you get with Games Workshop, you want to apply that first and the super glue at the same time before pressing the two pieces together. However, because I'm using Tamiya super thin, I can apply the Tamiya plastic glue at a later date. So all we need to do at this stage is apply the super glue to this resin block here. Then we can close the two pieces together like so and hold them in place. And then I can bring in the Tamiya extra thin glue, and I can actually just effectively paint it along these seam lines, and the capillary action will soak it up and glue the two pieces together. And now we just need to wait a few minutes while it all sets. Now with those pieces all glued in place, the next step is just to cut out this little notch of plastic here. That will just help the turret weapon sit slightly better on the turret. Less important to do using my turret weapons, but definitely important to do if you are wanting to use the Forgeworld weapons. Now the easiest way to do this is just to score it out using the back of your blade. You can hold your knife flush and you just want to follow these edges all the way along, and once you've scored through enough, you can actually just probably cut through with your knife, and then we can replicate it again on the other side, again just having your knife flush with this edge and just scoring downwards. So with those two done, we can just repeat with this longer edge here, and again just scraping downwards, and after a while it's probably worth flipping it around to do on the other side. And then just repeat until that's gone all the way through. And then when that's mostly all the way done, you could actually probably just snap it off and pull the piece out like so. And then we can just clean this up with a knife. Those pieces are now all fully dry. The next step is going to be just an optional step, and that's going to be just filling in the gaps between the resin and the plastic on those side elements. Those won't actually be visible once the gun is mounted in place. If I just demonstrate that here, you can see that they'll actually be covered up. So you won't ever see them, but just for the sake of it, I'm going to do it anyway. There's a slight gap to the top where I've just cut out a bit too much, so that will be visible. So I'm just going to fill in that area there as well. As I said at the start of the video, there's several different methods that you can use. You could quite easily just roll up some green stuff and gap fill. That's actually quite straightforward to do. I've got some plastic putty, so I'm going to use that. It's relatively straightforward and dries pretty quickly, and you can just squeeze it straight into the gaps. It does shrink ever so slightly once it's dry as well, and then it can be sanded and cut away, so you do get some flexibility. And it's also water soluble, so you can always remove any excess with a bit of water, either via a brush or like a cotton bud. And then I've got a very small toothpick. This is a brass toothpick, which means I can reuse it. We just want to push some of it into this little gap seam here. In fact, I can apply just a bit extra directly on like so, and then use it to scrape off some of the excess. And actually, you can just wipe a lot of that off with your hands like so. So we can just let those bits dry. So I've left it about an hour for the putty to fully dry, and as you can see, it's done a nice job filling in all of those gaps. Once it's painted up, it'll all look quite seamless. So at this stage, we can again test out the model, adding in one of the guns just to see how it all fits. And you can see now that with that bottom piece removed, You get a bit more wiggle room if you do want to adjust the cannon a bit lower or a bit higher. It's at this stage you also want to, if you do want to, magnetize your model in place. So I've used on one of my existing ones an 8mm magnet, as we can see here, which is very large and probably too large, but that's what I historically did on one of my Leman Russes, so I've just kept it consistent with all of my kits, so all the weapons are interchangeable. All I had to do was drill it out and glue the magnet in place. I'd probably suggest maybe a 6mm or maybe even like a 5mm magnet instead. That should be strong enough. And then because I use quite a large one, rather than using 8mm magnet in here, I've used a string of 3mm magnets in a little triangle formation, so that actually allows it to fit in place and also gives it a bit of wiggle room if I want to have it slightly lower or have it slightly higher. So it relatively means you don't need to be super accurate on having the placement of the two magnets exactly the same, because they will try and lock together. So it sort of increases the area of where you can place it just ever so slightly, but enough that you can, you know, twist it around or move it up and down ever so slightly. So that's how I've done my magnets. Feel free to do it however you want for yours. However, if you didn't want to magnetize it and you don't want the options of swapping out other weapons, you could just use some super glue to glue these two contact points in place and glue it in like so. So just to replicate this being glued in place or magnetized, I'm just holding it in place with some blue tack or putty, depending on which country you're from. And then we want to look at adding the shroud on top. So this piece lines up with the hinges, so it can fit on like so. So you can see here how it would look with the turret weapon and the shroud just all test fitted in place. If you're going to be gluing your turret weapon in place, it makes perfect sense to glue on the shroud as well, and that's what I would do at this next step. If I just bring in my original one that I've pre-made that's all magnetized up, you can see it might be more beneficial to not actually glue this in place. It should be fine, to be honest, because the bottom bit is now missing, so you can easily move your gun through the bottom. You're not directly pulling outwards through the front, but you do still run a risk of accidentally knocking that, and while it will be relatively durable, you wouldn't want to snap it off. And again, it might be something you want to do due to the way the Forgeworld barrels are designed, which again I'll talk about in a little bit. So the method that I've done here of just holding that temporarily in place and not in a permanent way, so you could effectively knock it upwards and then just push it back downwards, is if I just flip it over, you can see I've just used two very small bits of blue tack, otherwise known as like putty. It's the sort of thing that you will stick posters to your walls, and you only need two very small pieces. It holds the front shroud in place perfectly fine, and does mean you can swap out your guns pretty easily without risk of accidentally knocking it. And it does mean you can always adjust the position based on the different turret weapons that you have. Likewise, I do also have plans to develop some large bore style cannons, something equivalent of a demolisher cannon, where maybe this would actually be raised upwards ever so slightly, just to counter for the fact that there might be a much larger barrel going in there. So if you wanted to future-proof it or just make sure you don't risk damaging it, that is one option. However, you might find that's not needed and gluing it down is perfectly fine. And that's it for the standard turret and using it with my turret weapons. However, if you do want to use it with the Forgeworld ones, let's talk a little bit more about that. So once again, I'm going to demo this with my pre-built turret this time because it's already magnetized up. And you can see here, here's two of the Forgeworld weapons. Here's the autocannon exterminator turret, and then we've got the battle cannon here as well. And they do have two slightly different top mounting pieces, which you can see here. So this one's got some rivets on, and then this one's got some tubing and that armor plate on top. If we just bring one of mine in, you can see that it doesn't have that extra detail. So you can add this on and fit it in underneath and then push this up. But what you'll find, if you want it super flush, it will actually push this piece up ever so slightly. Now you could have it like so. That does work, I think. Alternatively, you can just have your cannon mounted ever so slightly lower down. So you could have it like so. If you just reduce the barrel down slightly so it's poking out through the bottom, that should be fine in terms of the elevation of where it is on the tank, because the turret is raised up on a ring, so there shouldn't be any worry with this contacting the lower part of the tank. And it means that your shroud will be sort of horizontally across. Another alternative with the battle cannon one is actually to raise it up all the way to the top and do away with the shroud completely, and actually just show off this detail here. And if you were to do this, what I would be inclined to do is cut off some of those hinge points just so it's all flat, and then actually it will all line up quite nicely. And again, this would work if you're magnetizing it or gluing it in place. So, you know, you can start to see that you've got lots of different ways of variety of using this kit to visually design your tanks to be unique and different. So some tanks could have a shroud, other tanks could not. It's totally up to you. Alternatively, you could actually remove this block here with these two bolts on, cutting it away basically to where the main bit of the barrel actually starts. You could shave it down ever so slightly, because that is about the same size as the shroud. So you can see the shroud would go on here, and then actually that shroud would be much lower and the cannon would be much higher up. So that's an alternative way of doing it if you didn't want to just have the cannon positioned slightly lower. So that would be another way to mount the Forgeworld pieces using the shroud. Likewise with the exterminator, you could just have it slightly lower down like so. So it's poking out slightly from the bottom, and that should mean you can just place that shroud on like so. But you can see that that notch does get in the way a little bit. It's totally up to you. You could cut that piece off again on the Forgeworld one, just removing that to give this a better fit. Or alternatively, you could have this raised straight up and then just remove some of those hinges so it all lines up a bit better. So I would go for something about there. And then you could actually keep these two end hinges, because it does look like the pipes sort of feed into it, and just remove the middle two hinges. And then that would work quite well as well. So there we have the completed turret, using whichever method you want to secure the shroud in place. From here on you can build out the rest of the turret elements, such as adding the side armour and the hatch, and then you can also build out the rest of your tank as well. And with that, that is the end of this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it and found it relatively easy to use on your own tanks. If you've used this product and you've enjoyed it, you can head over to the original product page, find the reviews tab at the bottom and leave me a review. That would be great. You can also always send me photos of your finished tank, and I'm always fascinated by how people use my kits, so it'd be great to see what you've done with yours. And with that, thank you very much for this video, and until the next time, take care. If you want to support the channel, you can back me over on Patreon or use my Element Games affiliate link. You can find those down in the description below. You can also check out my online store, beyondthetabletop.com/shop, where I sell resin conversion kits for both infantry and vehicles. Thanks again for watching this video. Feel free to hit all the usual YouTube buttons to like and subscribe, or follow my other social media platforms for regular updates with what I'm working on. That's all for now. Until the next time, take care.